my background is I worked for the Register newspaper for many, many years as a staff illustrator. And we had all kinds of assignments from business stories to human interest stories. And I never dealt with editorial type stories because there's a division at the paper for that. But my experience was, although there were people that illustrated realistically at the paper, I always dealt with more conceptual ideas. So my mantra when I was an illustrator at the paper was the last thing I wanted to do was be realistic or representational. I wanted to take an idea and convey more of a feeling or a mood as opposed to showing something that was clearly representational. So for my career there, I avoided that. But when I illustrate for children, for the most part, I could still work by being conceptual, but children, in my opinion, needed a little bit more help when it came to conveying an idea about a story. So I would be a little bit more realistic. When I did, I've done a number of children's books, about 7 children's books, and they were published both through self-publishing and a traditional publisher, Houghton Mifflin. So I can also talk a little bit about the differences if anybody's interested in, if anybody's a children's writer or illustrator and wanted to get an idea about that, I can mention that as well if you want me to.
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, back in 93, I had an idea as I was driving to work at the paper. I saw a beautiful ginkgo tree, and I would drive by these trees every day to work, and all of a sudden the trees, instead of being green, they were yellow all of a sudden. I was really struck by that, so I did a little bit of research, and I wanted to create a children's story around that. So my previous experience had been with a self-publisher, and in this case, I was able to find a publisher for the book, and it's called Ginkgo and Moon, and it's quite old. 96 is a long time ago. You can see examples of the pieces in the gallery in the little room there. But this is the book. As you can see, it is pretty ancient. So, but it tells a story of love between a ginkgo tree and the moon. So I was able to be really conceptual about it. It did not have to be realistic at all. I could have, of course the moon doesn't really have a face, and that was okay by me because that was my experience with my career at the paper. So I had no trouble coming up with conceptual ideas of what I imagined would happen when the moon crossed the sky and the stars would, appear. I was able to really get into my head about that, and it was a real cinch for me. So a few years ago, I was approached by Jim Doty at Chapman University. I was very fortunate to be recommended to him by the publisher of the Register. He was looking for a children's book illustrator because he had a story that he wanted to publish. So because I had experience with both a self-publishing situation and a regular publishing opportunity, I approached him and said, well, I can help you with both. I can come up with a storyboard for the story by reading the story and drawing a storyboard, and then we'll try to approach publishers. I know how to do that. And, if that doesn't work out, we can always, approach another idea and do self-publishing. Well, he ended up, after we tried to pitch it to a number of publishers, and I don't know if you guys know this, but there's always a publisher for your book, but you can go through hundreds of publishers before you're accepted. So Jim was able to, fortunately, self-publish the book, so I didn't have all the structure that's surrounding a regular publisher. It was just Jim me and Cameron, who happens to be here luckily today. She was a huge, huge, big help, and I want to recognize how much help she was just sitting back there. Anyway, we were able to put together a book and find a self-publishing, I think a number of years ago it was called a Vanity Press, but I don't think they say that anymore. But we found a publisher for the book, and we put it together and had it published. And it's called A Christmas Adventure in Little Italy, and it was the story of Jim's childhood in the Little Italy section of Chicago. And because it was such a personal story, and he had some very definite ideas of what he wanted illustrated, we were able to work together. And instead of a normal situation where you would be assigned a book by a publisher, I was able to work really intimately with Jim, and it worked out really well. One of the things that he said, which I think that you mentioned earlier, that he wanted to really get across in his book was he remembers when he was a kid, and he would look through a book, and as a matter of fact, I have the Christmas Adventure book here too. That's this one here, and this came out a couple of years ago. It can still be bought online and through the website for the publisher. But one of the things that Jim talked about is he remembers reading and being able to read the words and then go over and look at the picture and find the things that were described in the words by looking at the picture. He really definitely wanted to do that. My experience had been that, especially with the paper, is that was the last thing we wanted to do, was repeat the image that was being represented by the words. We wanted to make it additional, give more of a mood, give more information in an illustration than you would normally put into a story. Something that could not be photographed would be illustrated. So it was really a struggle for me to go from being real conceptual to realistic. And this was my first attempt, and we were really pleased with how it turned out. You guys talked about computer-generated illustration. I have to say that, in all the years that I was illustrating, I did all kinds of different mediums, at the paper especially. In this case, you can see that these were painted alkyds and on board, but I made a real progression from, especially in a newspaper, doing these lavish paintings to getting down to doing my work in the computer. So at the time that we did this first book, I did create the illustrations in Photoshop. And that was not, creating originals from those illustrations was not something that I was used to either. So when Jim approached me a second time for a book, I thought, well, this time I'm going to paint, because I really wanted to have originals that, that I had painted so people could see the detail that I was putting into the paintings. And so this latest book that we've been working on is called it's called How Jimmy Finds His Voice, and it's a story about Jim again when he was a boy. And the book is not published yet. It's about to come out any day yet. But this is just a mock-up that I did of the book. And there is a difference, of course, between the pieces that I did on the computer, but I was able to paint, and I was trying to meld the two styles together. So I was able to paint these pieces, and I got a real good result. But I wanted to get back to the difference between conceptual and realistic illustrating. So in Jim's stories, again, he, if you want to look at these books later, I can have them so you can look through them. But he wanted everything to be very, very realistic, down to the types of things that Jimmy was carrying, what he was wearing had to be very specific. And again, this was a challenge for me because when I worked at the paper, especially, it's a real fast-paced environment. You have deadlines that are between a couple days up to maybe a couple weeks at the most, and the same with freelance illustrating. But I didn't have to really worry about details and that sort of thing with the illustrations that I was doing for the paper, and the same with the book that I did for myself. So I really had to keep going back and making sure that Jimmy's boots were the same color, and in Photoshop it was really easy because I was able to match the colors. And luckily, it's been so many years that when I did the illustrations for the latest book, if there were any corrections that I had to make, I could also do that in Photoshop. So that is so brilliant, and I don't know if anybody else does things that way, if they have to make a correction by taking something into Photoshop for children's books in particular, but it was really a lifesaver for our process with Mill City. And I wanted to say too that one of the things that I don't really do is look at other people's work. I mean, I look at things online for inspiration and so forth, but I don't really know what other artists or illustrators do with children's books. I'm kind of going on my own experience. So it had been quite a while since I had children that I read stories to, and of course the book that I did back in '96. So again, when Jim and I worked together, it's really a terrific partnership. He's able to say, well, I remember, standing on the stage in this, elementary school, and I remember, feeling the boards on the stage, with my bare feet and so forth. So that was super cool for inspiration as far as realistic detail that I wanted to, put into both of those books. And I can tell you a little bit about this story. I'll tell you about both of the books that we did together, Jim and I. The first book I said was about Jim's life in Little Italy in Chicago. And it's a very simple story about how Jimmy is going with his grandmother to deliver cookies to the church, and his little dog Blackie gets away from him and gets lost, and then it has a happy ending. I'm not going to give the ending away, but it has a happy ending and a recipe for biscotti, and it's again it was a really simple story. I'm sure that if we had gone to a standard publisher, that it would have been quite different. But it was great to be able to help realize Jim's vision, very specific as far as what he wanted in the book. And with the second book, it was super cool because he sent me photographs of the actual school where he went and pictures of the stage. And he had photographs of himself as a child, so I was able to copy some of the clothes that he wore. So, when I say realistic, I was getting, down to, the lunchbox that he carried, was one of those cowboy Roy Rogers, I can't remember which one.
Hop-along.
Yeah, Hop-along Cassidy, and you can look online for reference for that sort of stuff. So I did a lot of searching online for not only details in mid-century type design and decoration for the houses and so forth, but also I was able to copy even pictures of his mother, which appear in this second story. The second story is about Jim having a speech impediment as a child, and when he was in the first grade, he was asked to be in a play, and it's a true story like the other one was. And he was just mortified and scared that the kids were going to make fun of him because he couldn't speak properly. And again, it has a happy ending, and it has a good message about bullying and so forth. There were a couple of details that I had to fudge the reality on because I wasn't quite sure about it, but I wasn't sure what the ethnic makeup of a Chicago classroom was back in the mid-50s. So we wanted to be very inclusive, so we, threw everybody in there, not knowing, because back then things were pretty divided and separated. So there are a couple of things that I was able to sort of fudge a bit on, but it's very, very true to Jim's vision of his childhood, and what's really great about this book is that it benefits the university. So I guess I can see if anybody has any questions about maybe the difference between self-publishing and a standard publisher. Yes? Oh, I have 10 minutes? That's lots of time, huh? Thank you for telling me. All right. Okay, so again, other authors and artists are going to tell you, I'm sure, a different story from mine. But I will say that when I did, the first children's books I did were self-published, and I did 3 of them. And the experience was not pleasant for me. So I said to myself, I'll never do another children's book. But then I had this idea, and I thought, well, I'll try to get this, I'm going to take this down just. I'm going to try to do my own, and I was lucky enough to find a publisher. And again, that was back in, it actually was published in '96, so there was no internet, and the publisher was on the East Coast in Boston. And instead of being able to communicate through email and get things going really quickly, it took about a year of back and forth, mailing, snail mail, proofs and so forth, back and forth. The story was really simple for me to write, but it took a long time to edit, so I guess that kind of shows you what kind of a writer I am. But it was a really long, year-long process. I was pregnant with my youngest daughter, and when it was all over, I said, I am never doing another children's book ever again, because it was very grueling for me. And I have a real short attention span, and so newspaper deadlines are great for me because I can get an assignment, turn it around, and things are just coming and going really quickly, and it really serves me well. In all the children's books that I've done, it takes a long time. It's a long process, and you live with the book for at least a year, and especially and if you write it even longer probably. But for somebody with a short attention span like me, I really have to talk myself into keeping my energy up throughout the whole process. So then, when I got approached by Jim, I said, well, okay, here's another children's book, and I went through the process. It was so pleasant. Jim's so terrific that at the end of that book, I did not say, I'll never do another children's book again. And that's why we're working on this next one. And then I'm thinking, hey, maybe I'll write another one, because this has been really, really great. So, of course, the difference between publishing back in the 90s and now is very, very vastly different. It's really difficult, I'm sure, to get a book published with a standard publisher. And I know that there are, of course, other publishing venues besides going to Mill City like we did. But I really don't know about that, so I can't speak to that. But people are there are lots of venues now to get a book published. So even if you can't find a standard publisher, you can always get a printer and print one out like I did here and hand them out to people, or do it through Amazon. So that's really great about the technology, the difference between then and now. I mean, some really great things have transpired, while other things have sort of backed off, like the fact that it's kind of tough to get published in children's books today. Personally, I think that sitting down with a tablet with a child is not nearly as rewarding as sitting down with a book, where you can look at the pages and turn them back and forth and smell the paper. And hopefully children's book publishing will always be healthy and strong because of that, and people don't get crazy ideas about having a piece of plastic to read. No offense to people are really into that, because but I'm a little bit of a stickler as far as books are concerned.